Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another director battle. This is an old Japan affair between Shinya Tsukamoto and Takeshi Kitano. One director has been on my favourites list for about 30 years. Another one has rocketed up my big board quite recently, even though I haven't actually finalised the big board for quite some time. Both directors sometimes act in their films, sometimes generally due for budget reasons, and act in other people's films. Both directors work with relatively low budgets, and they are both absolutely wonderful. Both have a specific style that you kind of know, a specific milieu that you pretty much know. It's a Kitano or a Tsukamoto film. So we'll start with Kitano, who is the director who's been in my life for 30 years, and certainly quite a lot of my votes turn into who's actually been with me the longest. So we have Sonatine, which I saw in a cinema in London, and it absolutely blew me away. Kitano's editing style is pretty unique. Yes, his films have bursts of violence, but sometimes they're not as violent as you think they are, just because a lot of it is in the cut, how it's edited. His camera lingers a lot longer in things than perhaps other directors would do. He has a certain kind of humour that, again, you're either going to appreciate or not. This is a Yakuza film, as quite a lot of his films are, but it has a wonderful kind of break in the middle of the film where they just hang out on a beach. And play games, a nice form of Russian roulette. It also stars one of his many regular cast members, Susumu Terajima, who's always wonderful. It just absolutely blew me away. And then I saw his debut, Violent Cop, which I've done a video on way in the early days of this channel, probably about 3 years ago. One of the greatest debuts of all time that nobody mentions when they talk about great debuts. Again, just startling. There's a wonderful scene where he really does get to the nuts and bolts of cinematic violence. He shows you a kind of Hollywood of kind of music and slow motion, and then he just cuts the music and you just hear the ping of an aluminium baseball bat against somebody's skull, and you're kind of in the real world. Kitano films are stylish, they are stylized, but they're also brutal, the kind of explosion of violence. There's a wonderful scene where a bystander gets shot in a chase, which you don't see that often in films. You know, in films, you see characters running down the street shooting at each other, and it's almost as if the bullets only just go where they are. But as we know in real life, that doesn't actually happen. And in Violent Cop, we were introduced to the beat Takeshi Kitano persona, that shuffling, ambling walk. Kitano in Japan, as far as I'm aware, is still more famous for being a comedian than he is actually being a serious filmmaker. I think he is still underrated. I think the impression of him is, oh, he just makes gangster films. And yes, a lot of his films feature the Yakuza and are about gangsters, but there's more going on than that, I think. And then he did Boiling Point, which isn't amongst his best films, but there's still a lot of fun to be had. And then this is one of the ones that doesn't feature him as an actor, and it's one of the ones, yes, there's one story about a Yakuza boss, but it's a lot more kind of with a romantic tinge rather than guns a-blazing. Dolls is just absolutely stunning. Again, if you're familiar with Kitano just doing gangster films, Dolls is a film that will probably open your eyes a little bit. Absolutely visually ravishing, and it does have a true heart. Then we have Getting Any, which is more of the Beat Takeshi comedy persona. Yes, there's some cultural humour that you might not get, or I might, well, I certainly didn't get all of the little references, but it's so much fun. Is it a masterpiece or anything? No, but it's so much fun. The relationship between car and man. I did an interview with Daisuke Beppu on his channel. I was fortunate enough to be on that a while ago, and off camera we were talking about Kitano and how you could do a double bill video with Cronenberg's Crash and Kitano's Getting Any. It has both films kind of in their own way talk about the relationship between man and machine and human and car. We'll get to man and machine later. Then we have Hanabai, or Firework, which is probably Kitano's most famous. Again, this was the one that kind of blew him up on the festival scene as far as art house cinema. Again, features a lot of Kitano tropes, if you like, that editing style, bursts of violence, but this one had more of a heart. I think all of his films do, but obviously some of them can be a little bit colder than others to some people. Then you have Kids Return, which is an early one. Again, this one doesn't feature Kitano, but it's just another wonderful film about friendship and choosing a path through life. Then we have Kikujiro, which is kind of an episodic road movie with Kitano taking a kid under his wing. Then we have The Beautiful Little Scene at the Sea, which is almost a silent film. Again, this is another one that if you just think Kitano does gangster films, it might open your eyes a little bit. Then he did Outrage. These aren't in chronological order, but we have Outrage, Beyond Outrage, and Outrage Coda, which is a really good Yakuza trilogy of films, and this is a box set of the 3 films. Kitano doing Kitano things in the back. And then we have Brother, which was a film he shot in America. Fortunately, it never really took off. This one's generally lower down in everybody's list, but it's actually still very good. Again, there's a wonderful turn by Susumu Terajima. Then we have Achilles and the Tortoise, which I did a video on fairly recently, about an artist and following trends, which is again hilarious. Again, if you love Kitano and his humour, then this one's a must watch. And then we have Glory to the Filmmaker, which again is another hilarious one, kind of in the style of Getting Any. It's not perfect, but again it follows Kitano as a filmmaker desperately trying to make something that sells. He sends himself up. You know, at the start, there's a scene where it's like, I'm not going to make a Yakuza film again. Again, it's not perfect, but if you're into Kitano and you're familiar with his work, it's an absolute blast. Again, I did a video on this quite recently. So I've actually only got one Kitano to watch. Again, it's fairly hard to get. It's Raikou and the Seven Henchmen. That's the only one I've still to see. So Kitano, for me, is just absolutely amazing. I think he's underrated. His visual style, his editing style, his scores with Joe Hisaishi, and he's moved on from Joe Hisaishi. His scores are wonderful. Again, a certain sense of humour. His films are just absolutely wonderful. So we get to Tsukamoto, who, again, for me, has rocketed up my board. I saw Tetsuo, years ago. I saw another one that I'll mention years ago, but for the most part, these are films that I've only really seen in the last year or so. So we have Bullet Ballet. Again, Tsukamoto is all about the relationship between man and technology. In some regards, he does have some kind of through line with Cronenberg. And Bullet Ballet is about the relationship with guns and masculinity, and it's all set in living in a modern world, in a modern city, a city that almost is a character in quite a lot of his films. This Fires in the Plain, which is a remake by Kon Ichikawa, based on the same book. I think this was more from the book. Again, this took him years to make because Tsukamoto doesn't work with huge budgets. He's in it himself. It's a really wonderful fever dream of a war film. Brutal and pretty wonderful. And it's Gemini, which is one of these films that just absolutely blew me away. It's one of his 5-star films for me. Again, all about identity. Obviously, a film called Gemini. Just absolutely beautiful. And a wonderful little cameo by Asano. Then we have Kotoko, which again is just an absolutely wonderful film about mental health. Difficult to watch. It's an 18 for a reason, but really challenging, impressive filmmaking, again on a small budget. But again, what Tsukamoto can do in a small budget, most filmmakers would wish they could do. A Snake of June, which for me is another just stunner. Again, this one is about sexual politics and the relationship between sex and violence. Again, starring Tsukamoto himself. It's just absolutely wonderful, but not for the faint of heart. Then we have the 2 Tetsuo films. I haven't seen the third one. This is Iron Man and Body Hammer. Again, I don't think you can underestimate the importance of Iron Man and the effect it had. The second one's not quite as good for me, but the first one is a lot of fun. Is it perfect? No. But is it influential? Certainly. Then we have Tokyo Fist, another one about isolation in the city and violence. Not one of my favourites, but again, it's still like a 4 out of 5. Again, Tsukamoto's worst films are like still 4-star films. And then we have The Killing, with a couple of his short films, Haze and the Adventure of Denshu Kozo. The Killing from 2016 maybe, 2018, is phenomenal. It's a samurai film. again, Tsukamoto stars in it himself. And again, this is another 5-star film for me. Again, this is relationship with man and iron, literally, with katana, a samurai sword, and again it's about the relationship between humanity and war and masculinity. Again, on pretty much no budget, more impressive than lots of films with bigger budgets. Then we have the Arrow box set, and the reason I got this was pretty much because Vital is on Blu-ray. I do have an Arrow DVD of it. Vital was the film that I saw years and years ago, and I remember absolutely loving it. Starring Tadanobu Asano, who was in Ichi the Killer and lots of things. To me, this is my favourite Tsukamoto. It's absolutely amazing about mortality. It's one of the greatest statements on mortality. And it all came back to me. I mean, I hadn't seen it for about 20 years probably, and it just all came back to me. Hopefully it'll get a Region B Blu-ray release at some point. I mean, obviously Third Window are great for Kitano and Tsukamoto, so hopefully Third Window will release Vital. So you get Bullet Ballet and Tokyo Fist. They're just one disc with reversible artwork. And there's Tetsu and Killing. This isn't the deluxe edition of the Region A box set, which had a book as well. But I kind of just had to get it to get Vital on Blu-ray. I mean, obviously, as you know with these things, no doubt Third Window will soon announce that Vital's coming on Blu-ray Region B, but I don't really care because I had to get Vital on Blu-ray because it's an absolutely stunning film for me. So this one, for me at least, was a lot harder than obviously it would have been before I watched or rewatched the Tsukamoto stuff, because a lot of his films are just absolutely wonderful. But again, for me, I have to go with Kitano. You could argue quite easily that Tsukamoto might have a wider range of subjects, even though he still has that kind of through thing of the relationship between man and iron, literally. So you could argue that Tsukamoto has a wider range, but again, this is favourites. This is not objectively better. But Kitano just means more to me. His films have been with me longer, but again, this was a lot closer than I really thought it was going to be. Watching those Tsukamoto films actually did make me question who would actually win this, and it's not by a very wide margin for me anyway. But I'm going to go with Kitano. Who knows what it'll be in 2 years' time. Yeah, but both directors, if you're not familiar with them, go check them out and let me know in the comments. And if you are familiar with them, please let me know who your favourite one is. And thanks very much for watching another director battle. So this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying looking forward to your comments, and farewell.